The narrator described a rain-polished evening at the Voynich Library, where Evelyn Hart traced the vellum with cautious reverence. Evelyn said, "Centuries whisper in these leaves, and I will hear them." The librarian's lamp hummed like a tame star as she aligned a loop over a curling glyph. Ink bloomed into botanical spirals that refused to name themselves. Evelyn said, "If this is a code, it masks more than words." Thunder rolled beyond marble, and the room answered with a hush. She logged each folio and noted erratic line breaks like breathing. Evelyn said, "Patterns live in disorder when they hide." A sealed note waited under the cradle like a dare. It carried a neat signature and a warning Evelyn did not yet read. The narrator observed that discovery always asks a price before it shows its face. Evelyn said, "Then let it come, and let it make sense." The narrator noted that morning arrived with clean light and a list of questions. Evelyn arranged facsimiles by suspected scribe, aligning quirks like fingerprints. She compared glyph stems and tails until they formed a restless choir. Evelyn said, "If this sings, its meter is hidden." Footnotes recalled failed ciphers, each a scar on the manuscript skin. She sketched a wheel of shifts and keyed it to plant diagrams. Evelyn said, "Meaning grows where pattern feeds." A shadow crossed the frosted glass, and a knock tapped a measured code. Marcus Lee entered with a frown shaped by caution. Marcus said, "You asked for records, not trouble." The room held its breath as he set a folder down. Evelyn said, "Truth is trouble, and we are late." The narrator explained that Marcus brought permissions, plus silence priced in favors. He laid out circulation logs that mapped a manuscript's vanishings. Marcus said, 3 nights unaccounted for in the 70s. Margin notes from a vanished scholar haunted the pages. Evelyn said, "Absence leaves fingerprints if we dust for them." She traced a set of botanical plates and found a repeated star. Marcus said, "Coincidence is a liar with good timing." The star aligned to a folio believed misbound. Evelyn said, "Someone rearranged the voice to scramble its song." The lights flickered as a cloud crossed the sun. The paper seemed to exhale as pages turned. The narrator observed that patterns demanded tests, not hope. Evelyn built a cipher lattice and fed the star positions into a shift engine. Evelyn said, "If letters grow from leaves, they will cluster by design." The output refused to be alphabet or gloss. Marcus said, "Then maybe it speaks before it writes." She overlaid lunar cycles on herb diagrams and saw a rhythm. Evelyn said, "A calendar masked as foliage, maybe." Marcus watched the hall as if it could bloom danger. The door's latch clicked without opening. Evelyn said, "We should not be alone with this." The room listened to its own heartbeat and waited. The narrator recounted that an envelope arrived with no return, and the air shifted. A card inside warned that certain truths should sleep. Marcus said, "Someone knows your hours." Evelyn felt the weight and chose the blade of reason. Evelyn said, "Warnings are maps drawn by cowards." The signature belonged to Dr. Helena Voss, whose articles fenced off forbidden fields. Marcus said, "She curates secrets like relics." The card listed a room and a time for private counsel. Evelyn said, "Every closed door names a threshold." The clock's second hand tapped like a metronome teaching resolve. The day bent toward the meeting. The narrator described a conference room buried below the stacks, where the air kept secrets better than people. Dr. Helena Voss arrived with a measured smile sharpened by policy. Helena said, "Curiosity is a solvent that ruins bindings." Evelyn weighed the warning, and the invitation stitched beneath it. Evelyn said, "Truth outlasts bindings when handled with care." Marcus tracked the hallway with a glance that counted exits. Marcus said, "We sign what keeps the doors open, not our silence." Helena placed a folder marked with a red diagonal that meant "Don't copy." Helena said, "Provenance notes and a list of vanished readers." The narrator noted that names can vanish louder than voices. Evelyn said, Absences sketch a map. We can walk it. A clock hummed as if it had lungs. The narrator explained that the folder opened like a stage trap, dropping them into older dust. Evelyn mapped Helena's provenance trails against loan slips and sudden resignations. Evelyn said, these gaps line up with mismatched choirs. Marcus sorted dates into a rhythm that felt like code. Marcus said, every 6th month, a hand changes and a folio wanders. Helena watched their method, as a judge watches a witness. Helena said, assume errors before malice until malice insists. Evelyn found a plant drawing that repeated in rotated forms. Evelyn said, this is not illustration, it is indexing. The narrator marked a hush when possibility turns to design. Marcus said, design leaves intent like heat on glass. The narrator noted that night returned like a question mark with rain on its curve. Evelyn killed the room lights and raised a UV wand over vellum. Evelyn said, if a ghost writes, it writes in residues. Margins fluoresced in faint constellations that matched her wheel. Marcus said, stars on leaves, or leaves as stars. A hidden mark linked 2 choirs that should not speak. Evelyn said, sequence is a misdirection, not a mistake. Footsteps passed in the hallway and did not pause. Helena said, document what you can defend in sunlight. The glow thinned and returned as Evelyn swept the beam. The narrator heard the manuscript breathing in ultraviolet. The narrator described a morning of coffee gone cold, while theory ran hot. Evelyn overlaid the UV constellations on the rotated plants and lunar tables. I did it, Chaus. Evelyn said, the pattern predicts a tide, not a tongue. Marcus checked a star catalog and paused on an odd interval. Marcus said, these gaps echo a precession error. Helena adjusted a note, as if tuning a string. Helena said, or a designer who wanted to mimic drift. Evelyn plotted a trial key that turned stems into counts. Evelyn said, this yields numbers that pace like orbits. The narrator felt the rune stretch as scale changed. Marcus said, if the map is time, the text is motion. The narrator recounted that evidence gathered courage when named aloud. Evelyn presented a provisional thesis that the pages encode cycles, not letters. Evelyn said, meaning emerges from alignment, not alphabet. Marcus tested the key against a distant choir and found a pulse. Marcus said, it predicts a conjunction that matches an old comet. Helena considered the politics of any conclusion sharper than caution. Helena said, publish pattern, not origin or doors will close. Evelyn weighed prudence against velocity and chose a middle lane. Evelyn said, we show the math and let silence argue origin. The narrator felt the building lean toward storm or acclaim. The narrator explained that the room felt smaller once Evelyn learned her work had been noticed. A letter marked with the seal of the Manuscript Council summoned her to a private audience. Evelyn said, if they notice, they intend to silence or recruit. Marcus scanned the letter, his jaw tense with distrust. Marcus said, their archives hold truths only when chained. Helena adjusted her glasses, expression unreadable. Helena said, attend, but never walk alone. The council had buried dissent before beneath courtesy. Evelyn said, we face their gaze, not hide from it. The narrator described the approaching confrontation as a threshold lined with shadows. The narrator described a long oak table beneath chandeliers where voices carried power by their stillness. The keeper of secrets, Professor Adrian Keller, sat at the head, his eyes like polished obsidian. Keller said, your pattern paper was premature. Evelyn steadied her breath and met his gaze. Evelyn said, discovery waits for no sanction. Marcus tightened his fists beneath the table. Marcus said, suppression is not scholarship. Keller's smile was cold, precise. Keller said, what you pursue endangers stability. The narrator marked how words were sharpened to cut before they convinced. The narrator explained that Keller spread facsimiles like playing cards, each with annotations made decades earlier. Keller said, These men spent lives here and left empty-handed. Evelyn studied the ink, old but not faded. Evelyn said they looked for letters, not for cycles. Marcus leaned over and traced a star with his finger. Marcus said their blindness was by choice. Helena whispered sharply. Helena said, or by instruction. The chamber chilled as silence settled like frost. The narrator noted that knowledge was not absent but hidden behind intention. The narrator described how Keller leaned closer, voice lowering into warning. Keller said, "Truth is a contagion that weakens order." Evelyn resisted the pressure with steady tone. Evelyn said, "Order that fears truth collapses by itself." Marcus shifted, ready to stand if needed. Marcus said, "Silence is the greater risk." Helena's pen scratched notes, though her eyes stayed on Keller. Helena said, "You cannot erase what has already been glimpsed." The narrator explained that the council's stillness cracked, tension hissing like steam beneath iron. The narrator recounted that the meeting ended not with closure, but with threats folded in courtesy. Keller rose and placed his hand firmly on the manuscript copies. Keller said, "These remain under seal." Evelyn's resolve deepened rather than dimmed. Evelyn said, "Seals break, truth survives." Marcus gathered his notes quickly, anger in motion. Marcus said, "We will not leave our findings here to rot." Helena's voice was measured, but her eyes betrayed warning. Helena said, "Every word spoken tonight will echo in shadows." The narrator stated that the war for the manuscript had begun not in pages but in people. The narrator explained that Evelyn sensed betrayal's breath before she could name its source. A message arrived from Samuel Crane, a scholar who had once guided her. Samuel said, "I have notes that can untangle your cycles." Marcus scanned the words with suspicion heavy in his tone. Marcus said, "Help rarely arrives unshackled." Helena tapped her pen against the card in thought. Helena said, "Crane's allegiance shifts with wind and coin." Evelyn weighed history against hunger for progress. Evelyn said, "Every map carries a cost. We will pay it carefully." The narrator marked the errors taught, like a bowstring pulled for release. The narrator described the meeting arranged in a dim cafe near the river, where whispers lived better than truth. Samuel arrived with a satchel of papers, aged like wounds. Samuel said, "Your key is sound, but you missed a hidden layer." Evelyn studied his notes, wary yet drawn. Evelyn said, "You offer doors, but what rooms do they open?" Marcus leaned forward, distrust sharpening his voice. Marcus said, "Why now, after silence measured in years?" Samuel smiled, eyes shaded with secrets. Samuel said, "Because silence no longer protects me." The narrator explained that every ally may carry a shadow stitched to their sleeve. The narrator explained that Samuel's notes pointed toward deliberate rearrangement, pages inverted to cloak intent. Samuel said, "A false sequence hides a truer voice." Evelyn traced the cycles, lips pressed thin with concentration. Evelyn said, "If this aligns, meaning lies beneath misorder." Marcus clenched his jaw, watching Samuel with suspicion that refused to soften. Marcus said, "Your truths arrive poisoned by your motives." Samuel's smirk faltered, his tone sharpening. Samuel said, "Motive matters less than result." The narrator stated that the fragile fabric of trust frayed with each syllable. The narrator described how the tension cracked when Evelyn uncovered a page annotated not by scholars, but by Samuel himself. Evelyn said, "These notes bear your hand." Marcus stood, anger flaring sharp. Marcus said, "You led us into your maze." Samuel's tone shifted, calm turning brittle. Samuel said, "Every labyrinth still carries truth at its heart." Helena stepped forward, her voice low but firm. Helena said, "Deception turns allies into ghosts." The narrator observed that betrayal was not an act, but a slow unveiling. Evelyn said, "Then speak plainly, or we end this now." The narrator recounted that Samuel revealed a truth woven with venom. Samuel said, "The council keeps no secrets from me. I am their mirror. Evelyn felt the room contract under the weight of duplicity. Evelyn said, "So you serve the very hand that silences." Marcus's voice cut like iron. Marcus said, "You betrayed every word you ever taught." Samuel's smile was thin, sharp as glass. Samuel said, "Loyalty belongs to survival, not ideals." Helena's eyes narrowed, her voice quiet but edged. Helena said, "Survival without truth is only another death." The narrator stated that trust shattered, leaving shards sharp enough to cut anyone who reached again. The narrator explained that rain lashed the old library annex, a storm mirroring the grief that now entered their search. Evelyn found a folder labeled with a forgotten name, Clara Hayes, a researcher who vanished decades earlier. Evelyn said, "She touched these pages and never returned." Marcus traced the fragile photographs, his voice low. Marcus said, "Her absence echoes louder than her presence." Helena adjusted her glasses, tone heavy. Helena said, "Clara's loss was the price of pursuing what should remain hidden." Evelyn's eyes lingered on the annotations in Clara's hand. Evelyn said, "Her tragedy lights our way forward." The narrator noted that memory itself became catalyst, pulling the living toward the vanished. The narrator described how Clara's field notes contained sketches of plants never matched to Earth. Evelyn said, "These leaves are drawn from memory, not observation." Marcus frowned, tracing one curling symbol. Marcus said, "Or from something she could not name aloud." Helena's expression tightened, recognition flickering in her eyes. Helena said, "I saw fragments like these in sealed council reports." Evelyn studied the symbols, her resolve sharpening. Evelyn said, "Clara bridged the path, though it broke her." The narrator observed that discovery bore sorrow as its shadow, and sorrow demanded its place. The narrator explained that Clara's tragedy deepened when Evelyn uncovered a final entry written in haste. Evelyn read aloud, "They watch, they record, they rewrite what I see." Marcus clenched his jaw, fury restrained. Marcus said, "The council carved silence into her fate." Helena's voice was low, edged with regret. Helena said, "We let them bury her story." Evelyn closed the notebook, her voice trembling but steady. Evelyn said, "Then we will exhume it and give it breath." The narrator noted that grief had become fuel, not anchor. The narrator described how Evelyn connected Clara's sketches with the celestial cycles they had mapped. Evelyn said, "Clara saw the same pattern we did, but she paid in silence." Marcus drew a line through both charts, his voice sharp with purpose. Marcus said, "Then her voice is joined to ours." Helena leaned forward, tone steady but warning. Helena said, "Carrying her truth means carrying her danger." Evelyn placed Clara's notebook atop their own, as if layering time itself. Evelyn said, "We honor her by walking the path she marked." The narrator observed that the past folded into present, and the pattern grew heavier. The narrator recounted that Clara's ghost seemed to linger as the storm eased. Evelyn whispered into the hush. Evelyn said, "We carry her voice forward, unbroken." Marcus set his hand firmly on the table. Marcus said, "Her loss will not repeat under our watch." Helena's eyes glimmered, neither admitting guilt nor denying it. Helena said, "Then steel yourselves, because the council never forgives resurrection." The narrator described that Clara's fate became the flame that now burned in their search. Evelyn said, "Her tragedy is the warning and the key." The narrator explained that night gathered above the observatory like ink, awaiting a signature. Evelyn aligned Clara's star wheel with the manuscript's rotated plants. Evelyn said, "The diagrams breathe when set against tonight's sky." Marcus calibrated the scope and checked the comet ephemeris twice. Marcus said, "If the pulse is real, it repeats now." Helena unfolded a sealed memo she had saved for necessity. Helena said, "The council tracked this rhythm and forbade mention." A faint chime rose from a sensor tuned to ultraviolet scatter. Evelyn said, "The vellum remembers light, it was never shown." The narrator marked wonder braided with fear as the wheel clicked into phase. The narrator described how the mysterious outsider arrived without footsteps, as if the night delivered him. A courier placed an unlabeled drive beside the scope and withdrew. Evelyn said, "We invite risks when we invite truth." Marcus scanned the files and found a spectral analysis of inks. Marcus said, "Pigments tuned to frequencies beyond sunlight." Helena watched the dome slit, weighing caution against need. Helena said, "If this is bait, we name the hook before biting." The graphs showed response curves that matched stellar emission lines. Evelyn said, "The pages speak to a sky, not a tongue." The narrator felt the circle close where heaven met vellum. The narrator explained that revelation is a mirror that asks for a price. The data proved the manuscript encoded celestial cycles as instructions for timing. Evelyn said, "It is a calendar that conducts meaning like a score." Marcus modeled intervals and watched predicted flares align with marginal stars. Marcus said, "Every glyph counts duration, not letters." Helena turned the memo over and revealed Keller's countersignature. Helena said, "He knew and built silence from certainty." A distant elevator opened and closed with bureaucratic care. Evelyn said, "Then we reveal the pattern and its proof together." The narrator measured resolve like gravity, drawing bodies into orbit. The narrator described their return to the chamber where courtesy once wore a mask. Keller waited with a file and a practiced calm. Keller said, "Your speculation has corrupted students already." Evelyn placed the graphs and the star-matched vellum copies in sequence. Evelyn said, "This is replication, not faith." Marcus advanced slides that timed flares to marginal constellations. Marcus said, "Prediction stands where opinion kneels." Helena lifted the memo bearing his mark and let silence read it first. Helena said, "You certified what you forbade." The narrator watched power falter when truth arrived with instruments. The narrator recounted that confrontation turned when a hidden door in the records swung open. Keller exhaled and set down a small iron key from an older archive. Keller said, "You will learn what your proof will cost." Evelyn accepted the key without lowering her gaze. Evelyn said, "Cost is measured after payment, not before." Marcus gathered drives and backups with unspoken urgency. Marcus said, "We move before the door closes." Helena stepped beside Evelyn, choosing exposure over safety. Helena said, "Let the record outlive us if needed." The narrator declared that revelation had become a path, not a moment, and they stepped onto it together. The narrator explained that the hidden archive lay beneath stone vaults, older than the university itself. Evelyn unlocked the iron gate, the key grinding as if reluctant to serve. Evelyn said, "Truth waits where silence thought it safe." Marcus swept his flashlight across shelves of sealed chests. Marcus said, "Every box here is a tomb of voices." Helena traced her hand over dust-laden bindings. Helena said, "The council has curated forgetting for centuries." The air was damp, carrying the weight of secrets. Evelyn said, "Then tonight, we exhume what they buried." The narrator marked the descent as more than physical, a plunge into truth's marrow. The narrator described how boxes gave way to ledgers, each marked with vanished scholars' names. Evelyn opened one, revealing notes censored and rewritten by unseen hands. Evelyn said, "They rewrote memory into obedience." Marcus' jaw tightened as he found Clara's name scratched out. Marcus said, "Even the dead were made to vanish twice." Helena's eyes narrowed at Keller's signature on a redacted page. Helena said, "He preserved control with a pen sharper than any blade." Evelyn lifted her chin, resolve bright. Evelyn said, "We restore what they erased." The narrator marked how truth emerged as resurrection, not discovery. The narrator explained that Keller arrived, footsteps echoing through the vault. His calm carried menace sharpened by certainty. Keller said, "You dig graves when you should build walls." Evelyn stood firm, holding the manuscript facsimiles in one hand. Evelyn said, "Walls crumble, truth survives the mortar." Marcus stepped forward, defiance in his tone. Marcus said, Your silence murdered Clara and countless others. Keller's eyes flashed, but Helena lifted her voice with clarity. Helena said, "We stand on record, and the record bears your mark." The narrator described the vault, trembling with the weight of confrontation. The narrator described the final clash not in fists but in revelations spoken aloud. Evelyn laid charts across the stone altar. Evelyn said, "Cycles repeat, and we stand witness." Marcus projected intervals with a portable light. Marcus said, "Proof predicts the sky tonight." Helena placed Keller's countersigned memo beside the data. Helena said, "Your silence authenticated our voice." Keller's lips tightened, the mask of control breaking. Keller said, "The world is not ready, and neither are you." The narrator stated that readiness had no measure, only the courage to speak despite fear. The narrator recounted that the vault doors opened with dawn's first light, as though the world demanded witness. Evelyn carried Clara's notebook and their findings in one hand. Evelyn said, "The truth belongs to the living now." Marcus looked back at the chamber, voice steady. Marcus said, "Let the council bury shadows but not voices." Helena walked beside them, her tone quiet yet sure. Helena said, "This record will survive us." Behind them, Keller's figure faded into stone, his power broken by exposure. The narrator concluded that the manuscript had never spoken in words but in cycles, and now its voice was free.